It's so gooey. It's almost like molten, the filling.
Hi bakers, it's Kye. I'm in the King Arthur studio today, and we are making the cutest small batch recipe you've ever seen. It makes just 2 perfect cinnamon rolls. They have this fragrant filling and a super simple icing, and it's perfect for you and a friend or a special someone, or maybe just you and then you later. You can find the full recipe in the description below if you need measurements or step-by-step instructions. So let me show you how to make them. Let's get started. So our small batch cinnamon roll recipe starts with just 1 cup or 120 grams of King Arthur all-purpose flour. And it's not very much flour, but remember we're making a small amount of dough, enough just for 2 cinnamon rolls. And we're using all-purpose flour here because it'll give our cinnamon rolls a really nice height and rise in the oven, but it'll also be tender and have that delicate texture. Then I'll add 1 tablespoon of sugar, which helps with browning. It turns the cinnamon rolls a gorgeous golden color and gives the dough just a little bit of sweetness. Then I have our instant yeast, which I'll add right to the mix. That'll make the cinnamon buns rise. And then I'll add our salt, which helps round out the flavor. Now I'll give these dry ingredients a quick whisk to make sure that everything is combined. Next, we'll add our whole milk, which is a little bit warm to the touch, which just helps melt the butter and bring everything together. This is about 1/3 cup or 76 grams. We have 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter, which gives the dough a little bit of richness. And then we have our pure vanilla extract, which gives the dough a level of complexity, sweetness. It smells really wonderful when it's baking. It just brings out all the other flavors. So we'll add 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla right into the mix. So now I'll use my bowl scraper to combine the ingredients roughly. And you'll notice I'm not doing this in a stand mixer, and that's because this is such a small amount of dough, it's actually easier to do by hand. Otherwise it just kind of spins around in the bottom of your mixer, and this comes together really easily since it's such a small amount. So this is a great opportunity to work the dough with your hands, practice those kneading skills, and just enjoy the 5 minutes or so that you'll knead the dough. So I'm just kind of blending in the butter, working in any of the dry ingredients. And once this comes together into a shaggy mass, I will turn it out onto our work surface. So this definitely isn't a smooth dough yet, but it's coming together into one ball, it's holding together, and that means we're ready to knead it on our surface. I'll give our work surface just a quick dusting of flour to prevent sticking, and then I'll scrape everything out. Put a little bit of additional flour on your hands, and then start to bring the dough together. We'll do our traditional kneading method, which is just a quick fold, a rock forward, and then a turn, which helps organize the dough. It makes it smooth and bouncy, and it incorporates all of the ingredients. If there's a little bit of butter that's sticking to your surface, just scrape it up, add it back in, add just a sprinkle of flour, and then continue to gently knead. The dough will smooth out, it'll become bouncy. This would be a great recipe for a child to practice kneading with because it's such a small amount of dough. It's not very intimidating and it comes together really quickly. If it starts to stick to your hands, you can just kind of rub off any of the sticky dough, grab a little bit more flour, and continue to knead. And it will start to come together nicely. You want to avoid adding too much additional flour because that can make the dough heavy, and we want these to be really light cinnamon buns. So use as much as you need to prevent sticking, but try to use just a sprinkle each time so that we don't add too much additional flour. So you can check to see if your dough is fully kneaded by gathering it into a ball and poking it with your finger. If the dough springs back and feels strong and bouncy, you're done. If it feels a little soft or if you poke it and the indent stays, it means it needs just a little bit more development of that gluten. So knead it for another minute or 2 and then it'll be ready to go. This looks great. It's such a cute small amount of dough. It almost feels like a dinner roll. It's nice and smooth, it's bouncy. I'll put it in a clean glass bowl to rise, and I'll cover it and check on it about 45 minutes. So while our cinnamon bun dough is rising, let's make the filling. It starts with brown sugar. You can use light or dark. I've chosen to use dark today for a little bit more of that molasses flavor. Next, we'll add 2 teaspoons of flour, and the flour helps to stabilize the filling because sugar can turn liquid when it's baking. So to prevent your cinnamon buns from having all that filling leaking out, you really want to keep it in place in that swirl. We add a little bit of flour to help stabilize. Next comes the essential ingredient for cinnamon buns, which is cinnamon. There are a lot of different kinds of cinnamon that you can choose from when you're baking. We offer our Vietnamese cinnamon, which is also known as Saigon cinnamon, which is really aromatic and robust, spicy, and has almost that cinnamon red hot smell to it. It's quite strong. Most of the US spice market is made up of Indonesian cinnamon, which is a little bit softer, more mild, it's lighter in color, it's earthy. And so if you're using Indonesian cinnamon or a traditional cinnamon from a grocery store, you need to use 3/4 of a teaspoon. If you're using a Vietnamese cinnamon, which is more robust and stronger, just use 1/2 teaspoon. So I'm using 1/2 teaspoon of the Vietnamese cinnamon, which will smell amazing when it's baking in your kitchen. And then last, we add just a pinch of salt, which helps balance out the sweetness and just makes everything taste a little bit better. Then you can use a fork or a small whisk to combine the ingredients. And if your brown sugar is a little bit dry, you can get in there with your hands and just break up any clumps until it's smooth and evenly combined. Now we'll set this filling mixture aside until our dough is ready to shape. So our dough has been rising for about 45 minutes, and let's take a look to see if it's ready to work with. It looks like it's grown in size and is puffy. So I'll save my plastic for covering the cinnamon rolls when they're rising. Put a little bit of flour on my surface, and turn this out to check out the dough. So the dough feels nice and relaxed, almost marshmallowy, and when I give it a nice poke, the indent stays, which means it's ready to shape. It's nice and relaxed, so I'll start just by using my hands, and then we'll use a rolling pin. We're trying to get the dough into a long, skinny rectangle that's about 4 inches wide and 10 inches long. If you want to be precise, you can have a ruler to make sure that you're right in that zone. And it shouldn't take too much pressure if the dough is nice and relaxed after rising. Once you have it roughly the right size, take a moment to square your edges so that each cinnamon roll is perfect. We're only making 2, so you want both to look picture perfect. And just about 4 inches wide, 10 inches long. Perfect, it's really quick and easy to roll out the dough. Next, I have a little bit of milk and I have a brush, and I'm going to brush the dough with milk so that the filling sticks. Leave the top 1/2 inch of dough bare. That's going to be the little end that we tuck underneath our cinnamon roll to keep it all rolled up during baking. So you don't want any milk or filling on that part. Then I'll take our filling, which is pretty dry, but the milk is going to help it stick. And I'll just sprinkle it evenly over the dough, again, leaving that top 1/2 inch bare. Before we cut the dough, you want to evenly spread the filling almost all the way to the edges and make sure that it's nice and even so every bite has a lot of cinnamon filling and has that great brown sugar flavor. At this point, you're ready to cut your dough in half. Usually with cinnamon roll recipes, you roll it up and then cut it, but we found that with just making 2, it's easier to cut it at this point. So you could use a pizza wheel, a bench knife, or just a sharp knife to divide the dough in half lengthwise so that you have 2 skinny strips. I'm going to start by scoring the dough just to make sure that my halfway mark looks accurate. Looks pretty good. So then I'll go ahead and slice the dough down the middle. Before you start rolling up your cinnamon buns, have a pan right next to you ready to go. And you can use whatever size pan you like. You could use a 9-inch cake pan, a big sheet pan, a 1/4 sheet pan. You just need to make sure there's enough space for these 2 cinnamon buns. Line your pan with a bit of parchment just to prevent any sticking. So now we're ready to roll, which is the fun part of making cinnamon buns. So starting with the short edge closest to you, we'll begin rolling up one of these pieces. It's kind of like rolling up a sleeping bag if you ever went to summer camp. Remember those times of rolling it up and pulling it tight. If you give it a little bit of a backwards tug towards yourself, it'll make a really nice clean spiral. So just gently roll the dough, pulling it towards yourself every so often, almost to the very end. When you only see the bit of dough that's not covered with filling left, you're going to pick it up. And this is a little move we call tucking the tail. This is the part of the dough that we call the tail. And you're just gonna give it a little stretch, and then you're going to bring it underneath the bottom of the cinnamon roll. And then we'll put it on our pan and make sure that little bit is underneath. It will keep the cinnamon bun from unfurling when it bakes. Then we just give it some gentle pressure so that it's not so tall. You'll see we have this really nice swirl and the tail is tucked underneath. So now we'll repeat that same rolling motion with the second piece of dough. So I'm just going to stretch the tail a little bit, tuck it underneath, and then place it on the sheet pan. To make sure that your cinnamon buns are as beautiful as possible, make sure that you place the cut sides facing up so that you get a really crisp, beautiful swirl. Now I'll cover these and let them rise for another 45 to 60 minutes before we bake them. Our cinnamon rolls have been rising for about 45 minutes and they've grown in size. And I can see a few pinholes in the top of the swirls, which means the yeast is doing its work. They're nice and risen. And when I poke them with my finger, the dough just slowly fills back in, which means they are ready for the oven. Look at how cute these are. Just two perfect cinnamon rolls. These are fresh from the oven and they look beautiful. They've got nice color all the way around, and if we were to take the temperature of the center with an instant read thermometer, it'd be about 195 degrees. So these are gonna cool briefly while we make our frosting, which is really basic, just 2 ingredients, confectioner sugar and a little bit of milk. So if your confectioner sugar is lumpy, start by sifting it. So add 2 to 3 teaspoons of milk to your confectioner sugar until it's the consistency that you're looking for. You can make it thin, almost like a glaze that you drizzle over the cinnamon buns, or you can make it like a stiff frosting that you spread on top. I'm gonna go somewhere in between. If you have any lumps, just give it a vigorous whisk until it's nice and smooth. This looks great. You could add a little splash of vanilla to this if you wanted some extra flavor. If you put the icing on piping hot cinnamon buns, it will melt and flow a little bit and kind of seep into the cracks. If you'd rather have it stay on top and not move as much, let them cool briefly before frosting. I'm just gonna go for frosting the warm cinnamon buns. It'll look so good. So use whatever tool you're most comfortable with. You could use a spoon or a spatula. I'm using a small offset spatula here to spread the frosting on the buns. Just kind of drizzle it. I like to spread the frosting in a swirl pattern so that you can still see that gorgeous design. This looks so good. It smells like heaven in here. You can let the frosting drip over the sides a little bit. It looks so good. Perfect, done. That's all it takes. I'm gonna go pour myself a cup of coffee and then finally we can enjoy these super cute 2 small batch cinnamon rolls. I guess I need a friend. It's kind of sad just eating one. Oh, okay, perfect, Tucker. So my cinnamon buns are still slightly warm. They're frosted. I've got a cup of tea and I am so ready to taste them. It smelled amazing all day in here. There's something about biting into a warm cinnamon bun that is just so nostalgic. It's just like a big hug. So fluffy. The frosting is not too sweet. The cinnamon really comes through. The dough is tender. I can't wait to get to the middle. That's the best bite right there. I'm gonna go for it. Make this recipe, small batch cinnamon rolls. You're gonna love it. You're gonna wanna make it on repeat. 2 cinnamon rolls every day. Enjoy.